we save the planet is the title. And some people might think that it means maybe we don't need to bother. You know, there's such deep troubles and who cares about existence. That's not what the question means. The question means we hope we can save it. Can it be saved? And how can it be saved? That's what the question is. There are many symptoms of the problems, and everybody is probably familiar with them to some extent. There are also measures. We can measure what the problems are. We want to know how bad is it. So just at the ecological level, we do the measurements. So it's important to think both in terms of symptoms, which are very familiar to us, and measurements, which are somewhat familiar to us, but perhaps not quite as much. And then we look for what are the measures of the resources of the planet and how much are they being used. What can we do about it? That's our focus for tonight, to try to figure out what can we do about it. There are lots of different efforts going on to change the whole way the planetary or the global system works. What are they? The first one is institutional change, or something like institutional change, not through the United Nations. There are many different examples of people saying we should do this. For instance, people are saying and doing this kind of thing. These are active processes, some of them. We should have a world vote. That means that all citizens around the world, of whatever country they're in, can vote to have a kind of global democracy. That's one thing. The second thing is various politicians have been thinking about something very closely related to that, and at a meeting that was held 3 weeks ago in Brussels, connected with the European Union slightly, the World Vote Now film was shown, and also politicians were talking about having a world vote. So this is a possibility that we want to look at a little bit more detail as well. But that's one of the efforts that's being made. Somebody who works in Vancouver named Duncan Graham, many of us know Duncan Graham well, he started something called Purple Dawn. So the vision that he had was that you'd have subunits of large governments and very small national governments that would get together and form some kind of global body. There's also various citizens' bodies that are acting as citizens to say, let's just get together as citizens and start a new governmental body. And there are major assemblies of these, hundreds of thousands of people, according to the promoters of these concepts. The second one is the transformation of the United Nations system. And the major current effort for transforming the system is the United Nations Parliamentary Assembly. So this is worth remembering to some extent. That's the United Nations Parliamentary Assembly, UNPA, and you can look it up, and individual citizens can sign on, and politicians, as Larry was saying, can sign on as well, and many have been. So 700 parliamentarians have signed on, etc., as Larry. The third approach is major reform of the United Nations. So there is transformation of the whole body, and the UNPA would transform, or could transform, the whole body by acquiring legislative authority. Legislative power could come in. And that would be a transformation of the United Nations, because it really bypasses the Security Council, which has the permanent members who have veto votes, and it's really bypassing it, and that's why the UNPA could be a very brilliant idea. The fourth approach is saying, well, we need to change our consciousness for the ecological point of view. We're overusing the planet. If each of us feels differently about things, maybe that would be good enough. So it seems to me that the United Nations Parliamentary Assembly is a very good proposal. So if you haven't signed on, I'm sure there are some people here who haven't, look up UNPA campaign UNPA, whatever. You'll find it very quickly. It'll be very right at the major reforms of the United Nations. We'll see what's happening, but the problem is this. The United Nations was formed in the 1940s. It was trying to do things that the League of Nations, which preceded it, was trying to do and couldn't quite do. So we can understand that it's now many years after the United Nations was formed. The United Nations doesn't have one of the three things that political scientists say all of them are required for civilized governance. The United Nations doesn't have one of them. The three things are a true executive. There's no executive that has more than internal authority. There is no legislative body. You need a legislature, that's the second. You need a judiciary that can work for any dispute between, like member states of the UN it would be. There's no such thing. The International Court of Justice requires that the disputant states have to agree in advance or be members of a group that has already agreed in advance. And that's only, at most, 1/3 or so of the United Nations member states. So not one of the three is there. So this is going to be the big problem of major reform of the United Nations under the United Nations system, rather than transformation of the system through something like the UNPA. So we want to think about how to really solve the problem. One thing that's needed is this kind of new body like the United Nations Parliamentary Assembly.